The death of a loved one is the deepest of sorrows, throwing every aspect of your life out of balance. To endure your sorrow, you must learn to face your loss and express fully your grief, and to trust that you can rebuild your life. This video gives a fresh look at understanding the grief process. Even though you will experience grief in your own way, you will find hope in life again.
And at 3:20 p.m. the doorbell rang. I thought I was going down to correct someone, but instead I found this handsome young man hysterical at my front door. And he said, "Oh my God, come quickly, I think I just hit your kids." David was bleeding, he was unconscious, but he was coming to. And so I ran over to John Paul, and John Paul wasn't breathing.
It was in March of 1994, March 15th, and I was asked to call a hospital in New Hampshire where Peter lives. I asked for his wife, and when I got her on the phone, she explained what had happened and that they weren't able to save him. Apparently what happened is his heart valve broke loose from the previous surgery he had had.
I received a phone call from the school, and they had said that there was an accident at the school. And our daughter, in the car that my daughter was in, and so Jane was downstairs doing laundry, and I told her that we better go, there's been an accident at the school.
As they turned into Bourne High, they took a left to go into the driveway. A truck broadsided the car, and Kristen was a passenger on the front seat.
On June 8th, 1992, Damien was found. He had been shot 4 times in the head.
So we waited 3 weeks before we went to a final diagnosis, and it was the Lou Gehrig's disease.
There was a degree of shock going on that let you numb out enough to keep on doing what you had to do. But it was pierced regularly by a pain that there are no words to describe. Intense, indescribable. As I put it, want to scream from heaven to hell, no, this cannot happen.
So sometimes there may be no feeling at all. Then I don't believe it. I don't believe the person is dying. I know what happens in that hospital. They mix up the X-rays. I just heard a program this morning, and there's a new form of handling cancer. This isn't true. This isn't happening.
One of the first stages is disbelief. The actual feeling that he's going to come through the door, or that it was all a dream, I'm going to wake up eventually. All of that manifests. But it takes time.
And I feel that shock is like a big, fluffy cotton ball that's all surrounds you, and it protects you from that pain that's there waiting to get through. And as time goes on, little by little, the cotton balls move away, and the pain is there, and it's real, and you know it's going to stay. And I wasn't prepared for the physical pain that I would feel. When you say people have a broken heart, let me tell you, they have a broken heart.
There's another dimension of a more long-lasting shock. And it's the question you ask yourself, or that Maureen and I would ask one another, is this really happening? Are we really going through this? And you're not asking it like you don't think it's happening. You're asking it because you can only let it in a little bit at a time.
The rest of the world assumes that as soon as the funeral is over, that grief is finished and we need to move on. We are already moving on, and that's one of the hard parts of the grief journey is our world didn't stop. So we are marching forwards or backwards, and that we're going to run the entire gamut of emotions. The same emotions you had before someone died, you will continue to have. You'll be angry, you might hurt. Grief is very physical, and there will be times when you are overwhelmed with fatigue or even physical pain. Your heart might hurt, your throat hurts, your head hurts. You think, Lord, I'm going crazy.
Grief is a roller coaster. There are moments when people say, I'm feeling so well, and then something happens. They see somebody who looks like their loved one, or they say, this is the year my son would graduate high school, and now he is no longer around. Grief is as individual as snowflakes and fingerprints. This is why you have to grieve in your own way.
I had no idea that I wouldn't be able to function as a person. I couldn't do my checkbook. I couldn't plan a meal. I couldn't go to the grocery store. Things that you just did without even thinking before. You just became such a mountain that you couldn't do it.
And I walked into his classroom, and unbeknownst to me, the teacher and the students had put up a photograph of Johnny, because they all loved him. And I looked at that photograph, and I looked at the class all ready for the new school year, and I felt like I was going through a slow-motion volcano in my soul. Or an earthquake. I felt like all the pieces of my heart and mind and soul were slowly coming apart, like a photograph of an earthquake done in very slow motion. And I just looked for some place that I could go to get out of the company of other people, because I felt like I was just imploding.
Well, the depression came. At first, I didn't realize that I was in a depression. There was many people that had to bring it to my attention that I was in a depression. Some mornings I couldn't even go to work. I was one of those persons that I had to get rid of everything that was his. The day that I went to identify his body, I came home immediately and gathered all of his things up. Well, I thought I had all the things up, but one particular morning I went into one of my closets to get an outfit to wear to work, and there was Damien's shirt that he had graduated in, and I just lost it.
I am caught unawares by this thing called grief. It attacks from every direction at unexpected times, triggered by harmless words or innocent deeds. It plunges me in the abyss of anguish, leaving me exhausted and struggling to gasp the next breath. It batters me about, then tosses me aside until its next sneak attack.
My daughter invited me to go to Florida with their family in April. I did, and I had a wonderful time. But when we went back to the airport, it suddenly hit me that when I got home, he wasn't going to be there.
I was angry with everyone. I can go to a certain part of the west side of Chicago and get a feeling, and I could just, if I had a BB gun, not a real gun, but a BB gun, I'd shoot all of those fellows that were standing on the street. That's how angry I was.
But you can't understand how another human being could take someone's life. You try to understand it, and that's the mistake that a lot of survivors of murder victims make. They want to understand murder instead of understanding their bereavement. And that's what stops them, and that's what holds them back. And that's why the grieving is often long-term. They go through years and years of trying to understand the murder, thinking that they're taking care of their emotions. when what they're trying to do is take care of what's real on the outside.
And I had a son, Daniel. He went into a very deep clinical depression, which we now know a lot more about. This is 16 years ago. And he committed suicide. I certainly do know that terrible pain of loss. And I think suicide is probably more emotions go with it, because you have the guilt, and if only I had recognized it, if only I could have prevented it.
Well, after my husband died of Lou Gehrig's disease, having been ill for a year and a half, I was relieved when he died. Relieved for him, but also relieved as much for myself. And I felt so good afterwards that I felt guilty about feeling good. And, I talked with somebody about it, and they said, enjoy it while you have it, because it's not going to last.
My wife and I were married for over 50 years. We're pretty traditional, so when we went somewhere, I would usually drive. When we arrived, I would always stop the car and turn to her, and for over 50 years, I'd say the same thing. Do you think we ought to lock it? And she'd turn back to me for over 50 years, and she'd say, what's the point? We don't have anything worth stealing. Then we would both get out of the car and lock it and go in. 2.5 years after my wife's death, when I drive somewhere, I still pull up, and my body automatically wants to turn to her and ask, should we lock the car?
Don't feel guilty for not feeling guilty, because you're able to go on with your life. And I want to ask you a question. Isn't this what your loved one would want you to do? Would he want you to wallow in pain and grief and loss and anguish? Knowing your husband, or your wife, this is what he or she would do. The highest testimonial you can do is live your life as meaningfully and as creatively as possible. And that's the highest monument you can erect to him. Not the monuments in the cemetery, but the life that you continue to live, enriched by his memory.
I tell people that when someone has died, there are two types of guilt. There's real guilt and there's imagined guilt. Imagined comes a lot from our social expectations. Real guilt comes from relationship troubles, things you know that you did to someone. In either case, there's only one thing you can do. Accept it, admit it, apologize, and move on. That's all you can do. Forgive yourself. Because we don't have perfect relationships. We're not perfect people. We're just people. When a loved one, when things seem out of sequence, out of order, that brings about a lot of guilt. Like, why am I still alive when so-and-so is dead?
The biggest things that I went through was the shock of it, and then the sadness and the disappointment for the loss of his future, and and his family's loss of the future with him. So, and that's kind of stayed with me. Whenever I think about it, it's more like just disappointment than the lack of opportunity to do the things that he wanted to do and to continue to raise his family. And I remember at the wake, at Peter's wake, the Catholic priest that was there from the local church approached me and said, "This isn't natural, is it? It should have happened the other way around." And I said, "You're absolutely right." And, I could tell you like any other parent that in the snap of our fingers we would change places, just to have it not happen, to lose a child.
First thing I think we can do with people is to accept your grief, whatever it may be. And these are the feelings that you might be having. And if you feel this way, these are normal feelings. Then you need to be able to express your feelings to people who will listen. If you have one good friend, you're lucky. Somebody who will listen and not say, this is the way you should feel. Sometimes you may need professional help. Going for professional help is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. You might need to get rid of some of this anger, this rage that is permeating your life. The worst part about children is that they are the forgotten mourners. I wrote the first book on explaining death to children. At that time, we found out that in 44% of the cases, when a child comes back from school, people are around, people are talking, people whispering, people are crying. Nobody says, your mother died, your father died, your uncle died. They say, I can't handle it. How can my poor children understand what's happening? The most important thing we can do with our children is to, number one, to talk with them and to them. And the fact is, when we let go of our feelings, we become the role model and tell them it's okay for them to feel the same way.
Damien was killed on my daughter's 12th birthday. And I didn't know until she would never clean up her room, and I went in there to clean her room up. I found a letter to God that she had written. She and Damien had had a big argument the day before he was killed, and they had said some things that, so she felt it was her fault. And she thought that by us not talking about it, we had just let Damien go. We just forgot all about Damien, but actually we were trying to protect each other.
I think of you in silence. My feelings seldom show. But how it hurts to lose you, no one will ever know. I hope there is eternal life so we can meet again. I not only lost my brother, I lost my very best friend. The reason you left so early, I'll never understand why. I just wish I'd known you were never coming back, 'cause I would have said goodbye.
Some people say, well, should I tell so-and-so that so-and-so died last night? How do I tell them? One thing you don't do is you don't tell children that they went to sleep. You tell them that they went to sleep, they will never sleep again. Not peacefully. It's important to explain to a child death. Most children, by the time they're 5 years old, they've seen death. If it's a bird or a dog, or they've seen death, you know? And so you can explain it to them in terminology that they understand, in short sentences, because they don't want anything long. They just want to understand.
And with that, our 10-year-old Gregory popped up and said, Dad, I think we should ask Johnny's forgiveness and tell him we're sorry for anything we ever did toward him that was unloving. So each of the children got close to their brother's face and asked his forgiveness for anything they'd ever done which was unkind or unloving, and asked his forgiveness and told him how much they loved him, and then each of them kissed him goodbye.
The difference that's very helpful for people to understand between whether you grieve and mourn is that grief is the thoughts and feelings we have inside when someone we have a relationship with dies. So we say you become bereaved, which indicates you have special needs. You come to grief. Well, mourning we could describe as the shared social response to loss, or grief gone public, taking how I feel about the experience and think about the experience and sharing it outside of self. And one central learning we've come to is that to integrate loss into our life, knowing you're forever changed, we don't resolve or get over grief. You live with it. You reconcile yourself to it, if you will.
Grief gets complicated because we make it so. There are lots of factors that can add to the intensity of grief, like the number of losses that you may have to be coping with at one time. Your coping skills and how you have coped with things before the loss will give us a good clue about the way you're going to handle this. But it gets complicated when we stop the process.
Men tend to handle their grief differently, and they're not as open to sharing publicly their feelings and stuff. And I think it's so valuable, but I understand it because, you know, we were brought up to be strong and not to cry and all that stuff, and, you know, to be macho, and you know, I went through those periods in my life as well. So I think men do themselves a disservice sometimes by not taking advantage of the resources available to them.
Bereavement can be very exciting when you decide to embrace it, Because when you decide to embrace it, there's no more denial. There's no getting angry at the wrong things. You just accept it. And when I looked at it all, the only commonality in my mom, my dad, my sibling, my sisters, and my brother's death was that they were all dead. It didn't matter how they died. They were all dead. I missed them. I wanted them back. I couldn't have them back. And that's what made me sad.
Why should I get my feet out of bed? Why should I go on living? I use the term dark night of the soul. When somebody in your life dies, you're brought to your knees, essentially, in the sense of it humbles you, and you know that your life is different and it's changed, and you may well question the meaning and purpose of your being here on this earth and what's important, what are your values. And so that ongoing need is to figure out, why is there purpose in my life? Why should I get up? Why should I go on living?
I'm not sure I can convince you that you're going to live another 10 minutes, let alone 10 years, let alone a couple of decades. What I'd like to assure you is that you can, and that living is the key word there. Right now you're surviving. That means breathing, means eating once in a while, means plodding through your day. That's not enough.
I would put it like this. It took a long, long time. It's not to say there were no moments of joy, and it's not to say there were no moments of laughter. The early months had moments of joy and moments of laughter, but they were simply a break from the pain. They were a bright splash of color on the palette of grief. I would say it was 6 or 8 months before I realized I'm experiencing a little bit of breathing space here.
You see little changes in your life and say, I must be getting a little better. You know, I went a whole week without crying, you know, a half hour each day, you know. Maybe it's only 5 minutes out of the day now, you know. And I find myself talking to her more freely. And I think talking to her more freely without that intense pain.
It's been it'll be 7 years in June, and I'm just becoming comfortable with it. 7 years. So it's been a long time before I could really feel that, okay, Damien is truly gone. Life truly has to go on. I'm going to a different spiritual level. I need to deal with this. I need to deal with life. I need to deal with actually what happens when you have a traumatic experience like that. All those unresolved things, issues that you have in your life manifest and come up to surface. And you have to deal with those things also.
There was a long time when it was just getting through the week, getting through the month. Getting on to the next thing. But finally, the turning point came, oddly enough, when an old friend died, who was a person of great faith. And, I mean, things that surrounded his death kind of lifted the veil that I felt like I was under. And I felt there is life beyond this. There is more than just getting through each day.
I wake up in the morning with the feel of Christmas. I can see the lights that hang above the streets downtown, the Christmas meal that sets upon the table as the gang comes home to share their Christmas cheer. But this is not a happy time for me because of the voice of one I do not hear. I think about the funeral and I see myself. I picture what I wore, and I regret the things I said and did not say. I think about him all the time and cry, because I could not say goodbye the way I would have liked. Perhaps he knows I feel this way, and with his help, this wound will heal.
And so I realized 6 or 8 months into it, I'm not thinking about him every hour. And you do a funny thing with that. Part of you doesn't want to let go of the pain. And it's a great mystery. And I don't know if other people, I can only speak as a father who lost a child, but you're not sure you want the pain to go away. And I used to say to Maureen, if God were a magician and made some deal with me, I'll heal you of your pain. I said, I think I would have said no, because I couldn't bear to let go of my pain too early, because my pain was my closest emotional connection to my son. And so for the pain to decrease made you fear that the relationship was somehow getting more distant, and the last thing you want is the relationship to get more distant.
First, all I could remember were the awful things. The horror came back. I'd close my eyes, and the pictures that I had at the very end of their lives, which were not serene and comforting, watching disease mechanism take place. If someone has died by an accident, you may have that picture in your mind. But eventually, I wanted to remember the life parts of their lives, and so I worked very hard to find good memories, not to substitute for the painful ones, but to bring back. And I think that's the whole key to my own journey, and I hope it will be a part of yours. You don't stop loving someone just because they died.
You can make it sound real fancy, but really it's essentially having a safe place to know that you still have a relationship with somebody that's died, but it's a relationship of movement from presence, where someone was there alive physically, to one of memory. I always say you must listen to the music of the past, to sing in the present, and dance into the future. We have the shortest social norms of any culture. Generally, you'll give people 3 days off work. Better be a biological nuclear family relative, and we want you back to the routine quickly and efficiently. We often confuse efficiency in this culture with effectiveness. To really integrate loss into your life, you're going to need ongoing support, not just for weeks or months or a year after a death. You're going to need that on an ongoing basis, because you'll have grief bursts until you die.
The first Christmas, wow, a major something. It was not the same Christmas. I couldn't put a decoration. I decorate my whole house for Christmas. It's one of my favorite holidays. Couldn't put a decoration up. That missing link was not there, and it was truly a void.
It's been 4 years now, and I still find myself with somebody who I haven't really talked to about it, friends or somebody, go over the whole process. I mean, at least the last couple of months. All the good, wonderful things that happened. And it has taken the edge off of loss with the memories of the good things that were there and the changes in relationships that came about through this whole thing.
There was one day that I really had to make a conscious decision whether I too would commit suicide or whether I would go on living. I very specifically remember the second that I made that choice. And having made it, I wanted to live it fully. So I got in a support group with another group of therapists, and we talked it all out. And one of the people that was the biggest help to me was a man whose son had committed suicide also a short time before my son had. So we would just sit together for hours and hours, and that's when I realized how important an organization, Compassionate Friends, is, because you have somebody to share that terrible, awful grief.
It's very important, I think, for people who are newly bereaved with the loss of a child to get with a group, you know, because it's a safe place where you know people are going to listen to you and they're going to be helpful to you. Because what you'll find out is that your relatives and your friends feel very awkward about it. And they don't even want to hear you when you start talking about it because it makes them feel uncomfortable.
So the best thing I can suggest for people who are thinking they're in complicated grief is to find some support for themselves, whether that is through their clergy, whether that's a mental health professional, or just a good friend who can listen. The best thing we can do is to embrace our journey, as painful and as sad as it might be, so that we can find the footsteps that lead us through it, not so that we stay forever in the valley of the shadow.
If someone came up to me and said, I've just lost my spouse, or I've just lost my child, or I've just lost my brother, what would you say? I would say a few things. One, I would say, give yourself time. Grieving takes time, and if you short-circuit the process, you promise yourself problems later on.
You just lost probably the most precious thing someone could ever lose is a child. You have a broken heart, and I don't have an answer for you. You know, all I can tell you is it's going to take time. And God knows it's taking time. It gets better, but it doesn't go away.
I think what I really want people to know is that even though death comes, love never goes away. It outlasts everything. Your journey will be your own. It will have its ups and downs. It will often look like we're not going to survive this at all. There'll be guilt that you are surviving. The first time you actually have a happy moment after someone has died, it's completely covered over with guilt that lasts for months. My gosh, how could I laugh? How could I have enjoyed the sunrise or the sunset when my loved one isn't here to enjoy it with me? The hardest part of grief for me, and maybe for you, is forgiving yourself for living.
We'll never, ever stop thinking about Kristen. We'll never, ever stop loving her. But we have learned that we can still enjoy the rest of our family and that life can be good. Like I said, never what it was before, but it can be good.
I believe the thing I discovered is that no matter how big the wound, no matter how much it hurts, no matter how purulent it gets, if you decide that you want to heal, and I do believe that healing is a choice, you will heal. That healing comes from reconciling that loss. It happened, it's real, I can't change it, whatever I've done wrong, I'm sorry. And just coming to that place of peace, that's what that reconciliation is.
And there's something in my faith, it's called the Song of Songs, it's a love story. It talks about the love of two people. And it starts with, behold thou art fair, my love, behold thou art fair. My beloved spake unto me and said, rise up, my loved one, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. The flowers appear in the earth, the time of the singing of the birds is come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. Behold, thou art fair. And then the writer, perhaps Solomon, realized that all love stories end in tragedy. Did you ever think of that? Death, divorce, separation. And so it ends by saying, for love is stronger than the grave. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. For love is stronger than death. And for you who are watching, I cannot take away your pain, but your love is stronger than death.